June 4th, 2004. Granby, Colorado. A small mountain town with a population of 1,500. The kind of place where nothing urgent ever happens. Where neighbors know each other by name. Where life moves at the pace of the Rocky Mountains themselves. Until 2:05 post-meridium that afternoon. That's when this emerged from a garage. 60 tons of steel and concrete built in secret for 18 months by a man the town thought they knew. A man they thought was just another local business owner, a welder, a mechanic, someone who kept to himself and paid his taxes. What you're looking at isn't just a bulldozer, it's a mobile fortress, bulletproof, bomb-proof, with gun ports, cameras, and supplies to last for several days. In the next 2 hours, it will wreak havoc on this small Colorado town. Police will fire over 200 rounds at it. And for the first time in United States history, a governor will consider firing a missile from a military helicopter at an American civilian. 13 buildings reduced to rubble, livelihoods destroyed in minutes. A town that will never feel safe again. This is the story of Marvin Heemeyer and the machine that would be seen on headlines around the world, the Killdozer. Marvin John Heemeyer was born on October 28, 1951, on a dairy farm in South Dakota. He grew up working with his hands, learning the value of hard work and self-reliance. In 1974, at the age of 23, Heemeyer enlisted in the United States Air Force. He was stationed at Lowry Air Force Base near Denver, Colorado. It was during his military service that Heemeyer first learned welding and mechanical skills that would serve him throughout his life. After completing his service, Heemeyer didn't leave Colorado. He had fallen in love with the Rocky Mountains, the wide open spaces, the sense of freedom that came with living in the American West. He moved to Boulder, where he operated several muffler repair shops around the Denver area. By all accounts, he was skilled at his trade. Customers appreciated his work, even if they sometimes found him a bit intense. In 1989, Heemeyer made a decision that would ultimately seal his fate. He moved to Grand Lake, Colorado, a small resort town about 16 miles from Granby. Grand Lake sits at an elevation of over 8,000 feet, nestled beside Colorado's largest natural lake. It's the kind of place people move to escape the hustle of city life. The air is thin and clean, the winters are harsh, the summers are perfect. Heemeyer seemed happy there. He had no family in the area, but he made friends. He was known as someone who could fix anything mechanical. If you had a problem with your muffler or exhaust system, Marvin was your man. He was quiet, kept to himself mostly, but he would help out a neighbor in need. In 1992, Heemeyer made what seemed like a smart business decision. He purchased 2 acres of land at an auction for $42,000, equivalent to about $94,000 today. The property was on the edge of Granby, near Highway 40. He had plans to lease it to a friend who wanted to build an auto repair shop. When those plans fell through, Heemeyer decided to build his own business there. He called it Mountain View Muffler. It was a modest operation, but it was his. He built the shop himself, working long hours with his welding equipment. The location wasn't perfect. It was somewhat isolated at the end of a dirt road, but it was affordable, and Heemeyer believed he could make it work. And for a while, it did work. Mountain View Muffler became a fixture in Granby. People brought their vehicles to Heemeyer, and he fixed them. He paid his taxes. He followed the rules, or at least most of them. Life was good enough. But there was something about Marvin Heemeyer that people didn't quite understand. Beneath the surface, he had a very black and white view of the world. You were either with him or against him, right or wrong, no middle ground, no compromise. And when he felt wronged, he didn't forget. He couldn't let it go. The first hints of this came in small incidents. There was the customer who brought in a truck for muffler work. Heemeyer installed the wrong type of muffler. The customer refused to pay the $124 bill. What should have been a simple business dispute became something much darker. Heemeyer threatened the customer so intensely that the man paid immediately and fled the shop, fearing for his safety. His wife would later say, quote, "He has threatened my husband's life over a muffler," end quote. But most people paid little attention to outbursts such as this. Heemeyer was odd, sure, maybe a bit intense, but harmless. Just another eccentric mountain man. What they didn't know was that behind the scenes, Marvin had begun to change, and not for the better. The transformation began with what seemed like a routine municipal issue, a sewer connection. When Heemeyer bought his property in 1992, there was no official sewer connection to the lot. This wasn't unusual for properties on the outskirts of town. Many rural properties in Colorado used septic systems. But as Granby grew and developed its municipal sewer system, the town required properties to connect if they were within a certain distance of the lines. The town requested that Heemeyer pay to connect his property to the sewer system. The cost was substantial, several $1,000s. Heemeyer refused. He believed it was the city's responsibility to provide the connection, not his. He proceeded to use a buried cement mixer as an illegal septic tank instead. This was a flagrant violation of health codes. When town officials discovered it during an inspection, they were furious. They issued a fine for $2,500. Heemeyer wrote the check, but in the memo line, he scribbled one word: cowards. It was a small act of defiance, but it revealed something about Heemeyer's mindset. He wasn't just upset about the fine. He saw himself as a victim. The town wasn't enforcing reasonable health and safety regulations. They were persecuting him. They were cowards who didn't have the courage to stand up to what he believed was government overreach. But the sewer dispute was only the beginning. The real conflict, the one that would consume Heemeyer's life and ultimately lead to his destruction, began in the late 1990s. The Doshef family owned Mountain Park Concrete, a concrete batch plant operation in Granby. They were looking to expand their business and wanted to build a new facility. The property they had their eye on was right next to Heemeyer's muffler shop. When Heemeyer learned of the Doshef family's plans, he was immediately opposed. A concrete plant next door would be disastrous for his business, he argued. The noise, the dust, the heavy truck traffic. It would drive away customers. And worse, the way the property was configured, it would cut off easy access to his shop. Initially, it seemed like Heemeyer might have been offered a way out. According to some reports, in 1992, before the concrete plant plans were finalized, the Doshef family offered to buy Heemeyer's land for $250,000. That was nearly 6 times what he had paid for it. A substantial profit for a property he'd owned for less than a year. Heemeyer initially agreed. A deal was struck. But then, at the last minute, Heemeyer changed his mind. He wanted more money. First, he asked for $375,000. When the Doshefs hesitated, he raised his demand to $375,000. Then, incredibly, he increased it again to $1 million. The Doshef family walked away. They weren't going to be held hostage by ever-increasing demands. Instead, they moved forward with their plans to build the concrete plant on the adjacent property they already owned. Heemeyer was furious. He saw this as betrayal. In his mind, the Doshefs should have paid whatever he asked. It was his property, after all. He could set any price he wanted. The fact that they wouldn't meet his demands proved, in his view, that they were out to get him. He fought the proposal with everything he had. He attended town council meetings, bringing neighbors and other business owners with him. He argued that the concrete plant would be an environmental hazard, that it would create excessive noise and dust. that it would damage property values in the area. He filled the small town hall meeting room with supporters, and for a moment, it looked like he might win. But the Dochev family fought back. They hired lawyers. They presented environmental studies showing the plant would meet all regulatory requirements. They pointed out that concrete plants existed in many small towns without causing the problems Heemeyer predicted. And crucially, they had the support of other local business owners who saw the plant as a source of jobs and economic growth. In the end, the Granby Town Board voted unanimously to approve the concrete plant. Heemeyer was the lone dissenter. Everyone else in town, it seemed, was against him, or at least that's how he saw it. "I felt like David versus Goliath," he would later say in his audio recordings, except David had God on his side. Heemeyer didn't give up. In 2001, he filed a lawsuit against the town, challenging the zoning decision. For months, the case wound its way through the legal system. Heemeyer spent thousands of dollars on attorney fees. He was convinced that once a judge heard his side of the story, justice would be served. The zoning approval would be overturned. The concrete plant would be stopped. In April of 2002, the lawsuit was dismissed. The judge found no grounds to overturn the town's decision. The concrete plant could proceed. Heemeyer was devastated. He blamed his own lawyer for the loss and demanded a refund. But the reality was simple. He had lost. The legal system had failed him, in his view. The town had failed him. His neighbors had failed him. God, it seemed, was not on his side after all, unless God had a different plan in mind. In the months following the lawsuit's dismissal, something shifted in Marvin Heemeyer's mind. Later, people would debate whether it was a mental breakdown, a descent into paranoia, or something else entirely. But whatever it was, the man who emerged from this period was not the same person who had moved to Granby a decade earlier. In July of 2002, Heemeyer traveled to California. He attended an auction and purchased a used Komatsu D 355A bulldozer for $16,000, equivalent to about $28,000 today. The Komatsu D 355A was a beast of a machine. These bulldozers were used in major construction projects, mining operations, and large-scale earth moving. The standard model weighed 49 tons, stood 12.5 feet tall, and was powered by a 410-horsepower turbocharged diesel engine. It could move at speeds up to 7.9 miles per hour. Heemeyer had the bulldozer shipped back to Granby. He parked it outside his shop with a "for sale" sign on it. He told people he was thinking about getting into the earth-moving business, or that he might auction it off. Several people asked about it, but no one made a serious offer. Looking back, some people wondered if this was a test. Was Heemeyer genuinely trying to sell the bulldozer? Or was he waiting for a sign? In his later audio recordings, he suggests that the failure to sell the bulldozer was a message from God. Quote, "I tried to sell it," he said, "but nobody was interested. That's when I knew what I had to do." End quote. In October of 2002, Heemeyer announced that he was closing Mountain View Muffler. He sold off most of his inventory and equipment. He told people he was moving on, maybe relocating to a different area. Some neighbors were sad to see him go. Others were relieved. Heemeyer had become increasingly difficult to deal with, prone to angry outbursts and conspiracy theories about the town government. In October of 2003, Heemeyer sold his property for $400,000, equivalent to nearly $700,000 today. That was about 10 times what he had originally paid for the land. The buyer was a waste disposal company. They agreed to let Heemeyer lease back half of the building until he had, quote, "finished some work," end quote. Nobody asked what that work was. They assumed he was packing up, tying up loose ends, preparing to leave town. They had no idea what was really happening inside that garage. For the next 18 months, from October 2002 to June 2004, Marvin Heemeyer worked in almost complete secrecy. He lived like a ghost in his own shop, working mostly at night. Neighbors occasionally heard the sounds of welding, grinding, hammering. But this wasn't unusual. Heemeyer was a welder. He was always working on something. What he was building, however, was like nothing anyone could have imagined. The Killdozer was an engineering marvel born from obsession and rage. The base was the Komatsu D355A bulldozer, but what Heemeyer did to that machine over 18 months transformed it into something unprecedented. The armor wasn't just steel plates welded together. It was a sophisticated composite design. Heemeyer used 2 layers of half-inch thick tool steel. Tool steel is among the hardest types of steel, designed for cutting machinery and industrial applications. It's extraordinarily tough and resistant to impacts. Between these 2 layers of tool steel, Heemeyer poured concrete. Lots of concrete. In some areas of the machine, the combined armor was over 1 foot thick. This created a composite armor system similar to what's used on military vehicles. The outer steel layer would absorb initial impacts from projectiles or explosives. The concrete would catch any fragments that penetrated the steel and dissipate the energy. The inner steel layer provided a final barrier. This design made the Killdozer nearly impervious to small arms fire and highly resistant to explosives. But armor was only part of the equation. Heemeyer knew he needed to be able to see where he was going. The problem was that once he sealed himself inside, there would be no windows, no way to look outside. His solution was brilliant and terrifying. He installed 5 video cameras around the exterior of the bulldozer, positioned to give him views in all directions. The camera feeds were routed to 2 video monitors mounted inside the cab, giving him a complete picture of his surroundings. But cameras would be an obvious vulnerability. Police would shoot them out immediately. So Heemeyer protected each camera with 3-inch thick sheets of bulletproof Lexan polycarbonate. Lexan is the same material used in bulletproof glass, capable of stopping most handgun and rifle rounds. Even if police managed to damage the Lexan, Heemeyer had another trick. He installed compressed air nozzles positioned to blow dust and debris away from the camera lenses. As long as the bulldozer was running, the cameras would stay clear. Inside the cab, Heemeyer created a survivalist's fortress. He installed an air conditioning system to keep the interior cool during the summer heat. Remember, this is a sealed metal box in Colorado in June. Without air conditioning, he would have cooked. He brought enough food and water to last a week. This wasn't a suicide mission, at least not initially. He was prepared for a siege. And then there were the weapons. Heemeyer installed 3 rifles in fixed positions inside the bulldozer, each pointing in a different direction. At the rear, he mounted a Barrett M82, a 50 caliber semi-automatic rifle. The Barrett M82 is not a weapon for hunting or target shooting. It's an anti-materiel rifle designed to destroy vehicles, aircraft, and fortifications. It can punch through engine blocks and light armor at ranges exceeding a mile. Pointing forward, Heemeyer mounted an FNFNC, a 5.56mm semi-automatic assault rifle. To the right, he had a Ruger Mini 14, firing 223 caliber rounds. Each weapon was positioned at a gun port, a small opening in the armor that would allow him to fire while remaining protected. In addition to the fixed rifles, he carried 2 handguns, a 357 Magnum revolver and a 9mm Kel-Tec P11 pistol. The message was clear. Heemeyer wasn't just planning to destroy buildings, he was prepared for a firefight. The final touch was perhaps the most chilling. Once everything was ready, once he was inside and prepared to begin, Heemeyer would use a crane to lower the armored top onto the bulldozer and weld it shut from the inside. There would be no way to open it from the outside, no escape hatch, no emergency exit. Once that hatch was welded shut, Marvin Heemeyer was committed. The only way this would end was with the bulldozer destroyed or with Heemeyer dead. He had planned for both possibilities. When the final armor plate was welded in place, the Killdozer weighed approximately 61 tons, 12 tons more than the standard bulldozer. This additional weight reduced the top speed somewhat, but it didn't matter. Heemeyer wasn't planning a race. He was planning a war. During those 18 months of construction, people came and went from Heemeyer's shop. Other welders stopped by, customers picked up vehicles, neighbors walked past, and somehow, incredibly, no one fully grasped what was happening. They saw the bulldozer, they heard the welding, but the pieces never came together. Or maybe they just couldn't believe someone would do something so extreme. In his audio recordings, Heemeyer saw this as divine providence. "So many people could have stopped me," he said, "but God kept them blind to what I was doing." While he worked on his machine, Heemeyer also worked on his manifesto. He recorded 2.5 hours of audio tapes explaining his grievances, his philosophy, his justifications for what he was about to do. He talks about the town officials who wronged him, the newspaper that criticized him, the judges who ruled against him, the neighbors who sided with his enemies. He compiled a written list as well. 107 names, people and businesses he held responsible for his troubles. At the top of the list was the Doshef family. He wrote their name as Douche F, a deliberate insult, a final expression of his contempt. The tapes are rambling, repetitive, and disturbing. Heemeyer sounds alternatively angry, self-pitying, and grandiose. He invokes God repeatedly, suggesting that he's acting as an instrument of divine justice. "I have been screwed a lot of times and I walked away from it," he says in one recording. "I'm going to take you on by myself. It's the only way I know how to do it. I'll be dead when it's over, but that's my conviction." In another section, he says, "I am going to sacrifice my life, my miserable future that you gave me, to show you that what you did was wrong." He talks about finding meaning in the signs around him. When he tried to sell the bulldozer and nobody bought it, he saw it as God telling him to use the machine for its true purpose. When people came to his shop and didn't notice what he was building, he interpreted it as God blinding them so his plan could proceed. "God blessed me in advance for the task that I am about to undertake," he says. "It is my duty, my obligation." Shortly before June 4th, Heemeyer mailed the audio tapes to his brother. He wanted someone to understand. He wanted his story to be told. He wanted people to know that he didn't take this decision lightly, that he had tried everything else, that he had been pushed too far. On the evening of June 3rd, 2004, Heemeyer made his final preparations. He loaded the weapons and ammunition. He checked the cameras and monitors. He started the diesel engine and let it warm up. Everything was ready. He climbed into the cab and sealed himself inside. Using the welding equipment he had installed for this purpose, he welded the top armor plate shut. The sound of the welding torch was the last sound the outside world would hear from Marvin Heemeyer until the Killdozer emerged. That night, Granby slept peacefully. People went about their lives, unaware that their town was about to become the site of something that would shock the entire nation. June 4th, 2004, 2:05 post-meridium. The garage door at Mountain View Muffler explodes outward. The Killdozer crashes through it, steel grinding, diesel engine roaring. 13 feet tall, 61 tons of armored fury. Workers at the concrete plant next door freeze in shock. They can't believe their eyes. The Killdozer immediately turns toward Mountain Park Concrete, the Doshef family's business. This is target number 1. This is where Heemeyer's war begins. Cody Doshef, one of the family members, is at the plant when the attack starts. He watches in horror as the massive machine bears down on his family's business. In desperation, Cody jumps into a front-end loader and rams it directly into the Killdozer. The impact is tremendous. But the Killdozer barely slows. Cody tries to lift the monster with his loader's bucket. The hydraulics strain. The engine screams. The front-end loader rocks back on its wheels from the effort. But the Killdozer doesn't budge. It's simply too heavy, too powerful. The Killdozer shoves Cody's loader aside like a toy. Cody scrambles for his handgun and fires at the machine's camera ports. The bullets spark off the bulletproof Lexan. From inside the steel cocoon, Heemeyer fires back. A rifle shot cracks through the air. Cody dives for cover. The first shots of Granby's war have been fired. The Killdozer plows into the concrete plant's metal building. The structure crumples like paper. Storage silos topple over. Cement mixers are crushed into scrap metal. Within minutes, years of work, hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment are reduced to rubble. Sirens begin to wail in the distance. Granby's tiny police force is responding, but they have no idea what they're about to face. From the concrete plant, the Killdozer turns onto Main Street. It crashes through fences, demolishes utility poles, tears up the pavement. Heemeyer knows exactly where he's going. He has a list: 13 buildings, 13 targets. The Killdozer turns toward Granby Town Hall, a brick building that houses the town government and the public library. Inside, it's children's story hour. 5 kids and several parents are gathered in the library listening to a librarian read. The building suddenly shakes as if hit by an earthquake. Bricks explode inward. Children scream. The librarian had received a warning call 60 seconds earlier from someone who saw the Killdozer heading their way. Those 60 seconds save lives. She's already rushing everyone toward the side door. 5 children and their families sprint for their lives as the building collapses behind them. The Killdozer grinds through Granby Town Hall, leaving the building demolished. This is where the zoning decision was made. This is where the town voted against him. Heemeyer's revenge is methodical and precise. Next target: the Thompson family home on 6th Street. Dick Thompson was a former mayor who sided against Heemeyer years ago. Thompson himself had died years earlier, but his 82-year-old widow, Thelma, still lived in the house. The Killdozer plows through the home. Thelma and her family escape out the back with seconds to spare. Decades of memories, family heirlooms, photographs, all flattened in seconds. By now, Granby's police force and the Colorado State Patrol have arrived in force. They can't believe what they're seeing. It looks like a tank, a military armored vehicle. But it's moving slowly, deliberately, from target to target. The deputies open fire with everything they have: AR-15 rifles, M14 battle rifles, shotguns loaded with armor-piercing slugs. The sound is deafening. Hundreds of rounds slam into the Killdozer, but the bullets just spark off the steel plating. The armor doesn't even dent. State Patrol Sergeant Glenn Traynor does something extraordinary. As the Killdozer moves through a parking lot, he sprints alongside it, grabs hold, and climbs on top. It's an act of incredible bravery and perhaps incredible foolishness. From his position on top of the machine, Traynor empties his M4 rifle into what he thinks is the radiator, trying to disable the engine. 6 shots, point blank, but nothing happens. The armor is too thick. From inside, Heemeyer fires back with his .50 caliber Barrett rifle. The massive rounds punch through the air around Traynor. He stays low, hugging the top of the armored hull. Other deputies toss him a flashbang grenade. These are explosive devices used in raids, designed to disorient with a massive burst of light and sound. Trainer drops it into the exhaust pipe. The explosion echoes through the steel hull. Surely this will stop the machine, but the Killdozer keeps moving. Heemeyer had anticipated this. He had reinforced the exhaust system. The Killdozer continues its rampage. It smashes through the offices of the Sky High News, the local newspaper that had criticized Heemeyer in editorials. The publisher's office is reduced to kindling. The printing press is crushed. Years of newspaper archives are destroyed. By now, news of the attack has spread beyond Granby. Television news helicopters circle overhead, broadcasting live footage to millions of viewers across the country. America watches in real time as a single man in an armored bulldozer terrorizes an entire town. In Denver, Colorado Governor Bill Owens is watching the news coverage when his phone rings. It's Granby Sheriff Rod Johnson. The sheriff's voice is strained, almost panicked. He explains the situation. A man in an armored bulldozer, unstoppable, destroying the town. They've fired over 200 rounds at it. They've used explosives. Nothing works. What happens next has been debated for years. According to multiple sources, Governor Owens and his staff discussed authorizing the use of military force against the Killdozer. Specifically, they considered two options. First, an Apache attack helicopter equipped with a Hellfire anti-tank missile. The Hellfire is a precision weapon designed to destroy enemy armor. A single Hellfire missile would absolutely destroy the Killdozer. No question, but it would also destroy everything around it. Buildings, vehicles, potentially people. The collateral damage in the heart of Granby would be catastrophic. The second option was a two-man fire team equipped with a Javelin anti-tank missile. The Javelin is a portable weapon system designed for infantry to use against tanks. It's devastatingly effective. But again, using such a weapon in a populated area would be incredibly dangerous. For the first time in American history, officials seriously discussed firing a missile at a civilian target on United States soil. The conversations were urgent. The Killdozer was still moving, still destroying, and nobody knew when or how it would stop. Years later, Governor Owens's staff would vehemently deny that they seriously considered the missile strike. But members of the state patrol who were present at the time insist the discussions happened. According to them, Governor Owens ultimately decided against authorizing military action. The potential collateral damage was too great. Better to evacuate the town and let the Killdozer run its course than risk killing innocent civilians with a missile strike. Meanwhile, the entire town of Granby, all 1,500 residents, receives evacuation orders. Emergency sirens wail. Parents grab their children. Elderly residents are helped from their homes. The mountain town has become a war zone. State Patrol roadblocks seal every route in and out. SWAT teams from 3 counties converge on Granby. Federal agents from the FBI and ATF are en route. News helicopters circle overhead. On live television, America watches as a single man holds an entire community hostage. At 3:55 post-meridium, nearly 2 hours after the rampage began, the Killdozer rolls into Gamble's hardware store parking lot. This is Casey Farrell's business. Farrell was a town board member who voted in favor of the concrete plant. He's on Heemeyer's list. The Killdozer crashes through the front wall. Inside the store, shelves of appliances, tools, and home goods explode as the building starts to collapse around the machine. But something's wrong. The engine that had roared for 2 hours is now gasping, overheating, seizing. The Killdozer wasn't designed for this. Heemeyer had armored it brilliantly, but the armor had consequences. The additional weight put enormous strain on the engine and transmission. The armor also trapped heat. Despite the air conditioning inside the cab, the engine compartment was overheating. And the hours of continuous operation, the constant impacts, the demolished buildings, all of it had taken a toll. As Heemeyer pushes deeper into the hardware store, determined to finish what he started, the Killdozer's right track sinks into the basement loading pit. The machine tilts to one side and becomes stuck. Behind him, road supervisor Clark Barnster sees an opportunity. He maneuvers a massive road scraper, a piece of heavy construction equipment, and wedges it against the back of the Killdozer. The Killdozer is trapped, rubble in front, 40 tons of earth mover behind. Heemeyer continues to push the engine as hard as he can. The diesel engine roars. Black smoke pours from the exhaust, but the machine doesn't move. At 4:10 post-meridium, the massive diesel engine bellows one final cloud of black smoke, screeches, and dies. For the first time in over 2 hours, Granby is quiet. SWAT teams surround the motionless machine. Over loudspeaker, they call for surrender, but there's no response. Officers approach cautiously. The Killdozer is silent. No engine noise, no movement. The cameras are still, no longer tracking their movements. Inside, Marvin Heemeyer sits in his steel cocoon. The air conditioning has stopped. The monitors have gone dark. It's over. He's destroyed 13 buildings. He's terrorized an entire town. His revenge is complete, but he's trapped. The hatch is welded shut. The machine is immobilized. There's no escape. And Heemeyer had never planned to escape. At 4:30 post-meridium, a single gunshot echoes from inside the steel tank. Then silence. Marvin Heemeyer, welder, neighbor, destroyer of towns, has taken his own life. It takes investigators several hours to cut their way into the Killdozer. The armor is so thick that their first attempts with cutting torches fail. They have to bring in specialized equipment. When they finally breach the armor and open the cab, they find Heemeyer's body. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The rampage lasted 2 hours and 7 minutes. 13 buildings destroyed, millions of dollars in damage. A community's sense of safety shattered forever. But somehow, impossibly, only one person is dead, the man who built the machine. How is that possible? In a 2-hour rampage through a populated town with a man firing rifles from an armored bulldozer, how did no one else die? The answer is a combination of luck, police action, and perhaps some small measure of restraint on Heemeyer's part. The reverse 911 system proved crucial. As soon as the attack began, emergency services used an automated system to call every phone in Granby, warning residents to evacuate immediately. This gave people time to flee before the Killdozer reached their locations. Police and sheriff's deputies worked tirelessly to evacuate buildings in the Killdozer's path. They went door to door, pulling people out of their homes and businesses, sometimes with only seconds to spare. The librarian who evacuated the children at Story Hour did so because she received a warning call. And despite Heemeyer's arsenal of weapons, despite the gun ports and the rifles, he didn't seem focused on killing people. His targets were buildings, structures, symbols of the system that he believed had wronged him. When he fired weapons, it was primarily at vehicles and equipment, not people. Whether this was intentional restraint or simply poor aim from inside the Killdozer, we'll never know for certain. But make no mistake, people came terrifyingly close to death. The children in the library escaped by seconds. Cody Dochef was shot at. Police officers were under fire. Heemeyer tried to create explosions by shooting at propane tanks. If any of those tanks had exploded, people would have died. The fact that the casualty list was limited to Heemeyer himself is borderline miraculous. After Heemeyer's death, investigators searched his home in Grand Lake. What they found was chilling. Detailed plans for the Killdozer were on his personal computer, complete with engineering diagrams and armor specifications. The 2.5 hours of audio recordings outlined his philosophy and justifications. And most disturbing, the handwritten list of 107 people he believed had wronged him. The list read like a paranoid conspiracy theory. Town trustees, judges, newspaper editors, neighbors, even a Catholic priest who had opposed Heemeyer's previous attempts to legalize gambling in the area. Each name represented someone who, in Heemeyer's mind, was part of a vast conspiracy against him. At the top of the list was the Dosheff family, written as Douche F. The concrete plant was target number 1, and it had been destroyed. In the days following the attack, questions swirled. How did this happen? How did someone build an armored tank in the middle of a small town without anyone stopping him? Should someone have seen the warning signs? The truth is, there were warning signs. Heemeyer's increasingly erratic behavior, his threats against the customer over the muffler bill, his paranoid rants about the town government, his isolation. But in a small mountain town where people valued independence and privacy, nobody wanted to pry too deeply into their neighbor's business. And even if someone had suspected something, what would they have reported? That Heemeyer was welding in his garage at night? That he was angry about zoning decisions? Nothing he did before June 4th was clearly illegal. He had a right to own a bulldozer. He had a right to modify it. The guns were legally owned. He had broken no laws, until he did. The Killdozer itself posed a unique problem. How do you dispose of something that has become a symbol? Law enforcement was deeply concerned that if the Killdozer remained intact, it would become a shrine. People might visit it, take photos with it, collect pieces of it as souvenirs. Even worse, someone might be inspired to replicate Heemeyer's actions. The decision was made to completely destroy the Killdozer and scatter the pieces. In 2005, the armored bulldozer was cut into pieces using oxyacetylene torches. Even this took considerable time and effort. The armor was so thick that cutting through it was difficult. The pieces were then sent to multiple scrapyards across Colorado. No single piece large enough to be recognizable was kept. Nothing that could become a memorial or inspiration. It was as if the Killdozer had never existed. All that remained were photographs and video footage. Today, 20 years after the attack, Granby has been rebuilt. New buildings stand where old ones fell. The concrete plant was reconstructed, the town hall was replaced, Gamble's hardware store reopened in a new location. The scars in the pavement have been paved over. Life goes on in this quiet mountain town, but the story refuses to die. In certain corners of the internet, Marvin Heemeyer has become something he never was in life. A folk hero, a symbol of the little man fighting back against the system. They call him a patriot who stood up to government tyranny. June 4th is celebrated by some as Killdozer Day, an annual commemoration of his rampage. Message boards and social media are filled with people defending Heemeyer. They focus on his grievances with the town, the zoning dispute, the sewer fine. They portray him as a victim who was pushed too far, a man who tried everything legal and, when all else failed, took matters into his own hands. In this telling, he's a hero, a martyr, someone who had the courage to fight back when everyone else would have simply accepted defeat. But the people of Granby remember differently. They remember the terror, the children who barely escaped the library, the 82-year-old widow whose home was crushed, the 2 hours where their world was turned upside down. They remember Cody Dosheff being shot at, police officers risking their lives, the discussions about firing missiles into their town. Patrick Brower, a reporter who covered Heemeyer's disputes for years and who was nearly killed during the attack, has spoken out against the folk hero narrative. He receives threatening and insulting comments for pushing back against people who lionize Heemeyer. The story that gets told is that Marv was victimized by this small-town board that was out to get him, Brower says. But the idea that Granby was sophisticated enough to launch a campaign to destroy Marvin Heemeyer really defies my imagination. The truth is more complex and less heroic than the internet legend. Yes, Heemeyer had legitimate grievances. The sewer connection requirement was probably unfair. The concrete plant did impact his business, but he also refused reasonable compromises. He turned down a substantial profit when he could have sold his land. He escalated every conflict. He saw conspiracies where there were just bureaucratic decisions, and in the end, he built a machine of destruction and terrorized an entire town. He destroyed livelihoods. He traumatized children. He endangered countless lives. The fact that only he died was due to luck and the heroic efforts of law enforcement, not to any restraint on his part. Marvin Heemeyer wanted to be remembered as a righteous man pushed too far, but Sheriff Rod Johnson would later say, "This wasn't about righting a wrong, it was about a man bent on revenge." The Killdozer incident raises uncomfortable questions about justice, grievance, and the limits of the legal system. When a person feels they've been wronged, what recourse do they have? When the courts fail them, when local government seems indifferent or corrupt, what options remain? These are legitimate questions and they deserve serious consideration. But Heemeyer's answer, his solution, was not justice. It was terrorism. It was the belief that if the system doesn't rule in your favor, you have the right to destroy it. That's not heroism. That's narcissism and rage. The real heroes of June 4th, 2004, were the police officers who risked their lives, the librarian who evacuated the children, the emergency services workers who called every home in town, the citizens who helped their neighbors escape. They're the ones who prevented this from becoming a massacre. As for Granby itself, the town has moved on as best it can. Tourism continues. Skiers visit in winter. Summer brings hikers and fishermen. Life in the Rocky Mountains goes on. But if you talk to longtime residents, many of whom were there that day, they'll tell you the town never quite recovered. There's a wariness now, a sense that safety is fragile, that the person next door, the quiet welder who keeps to himself, might be building something terrible in his garage. And perhaps that's the real legacy of the Killdozer. Not a tale of heroic resistance, but a reminder that unchecked grievance, combined with isolation and access to tools of destruction, can create unimaginable harm. Marvin Heemeyer believed he was an instrument of God's justice, but all he really accomplished was the destruction of a small town's sense of security and the creation of millions of dollars in damage. He solved nothing. He proved nothing. He changed nothing, except to traumatize hundreds of innocent people. In the end, the only thing the Killdozer destroyed was Marvin Heemeyer himself. And perhaps that's the most fitting ending of all.